and welcome to Pond Boys Angling Adventures, the multi-species traveling fishing show. So, it's been a couple weeks. I've been busy, getting skunked. We had our last podcast about yarping or kayak carp fishing, which, if you didn't hear that, the last podcast, you should, and if you haven't tried it, you should. But I stubbornly stuck with it. And usually I'm the guy who preaches change species whenever you can, change spots as soon as you need to, change your lineup, change everything quickly, and to have the most amount of opportunities available to you. If you're a multi-species fisherman, you should not be stuck at one species. But I had been doing so well at carp that I just would not let it go. And after 3 skunks in a row, really, really ticked me off. JC Crappie from JC's Castaway said, "Dude, man, you got to stop being so stubborn. You got to do something else. Why don't we just go for crappies or something?" So I'm like, all right, crappies it is. So today I wanted to talk about fall crappies. Now, we've talked about basic crappie fishing in the past. We talked a lot of, your basic baits and how to use them and stuff. And a lot of that will cover just your shore fishing for crappies in most ponds, which have really small, at least in the Midwest around Chicago. Most crappies around here just aren't big. I mean, anything over 7 inches is a really nice crappie. They just get poached and kept, and they're hard. It's hard to get quality fish. But a small minnow or small ice jigs or microplastics, or something tipped with a waxy will be great for shore fishing with, for small crappies. I know probably 30 crappie ponds, and out of those 30, 3 have what I would consider a fully grown crappie in our area that exceed 8 inches. Most of them are, if we get a good sized crappie here, they're 10 or 11 inches, we're ecstatic. If we catch a 12, we're like, holy crap, I got a 12. And there's a catch and release lake, which we're allowed to kayak, we need a permit for. So that's where we decided to go. So, on our other episodes, we talked about kayak safety in detail. But if you have a kayak, you got to be safe. So the first thing I did is I made sure I had all my safety gear. My flotation device, a whistle, made sure my phone was waterproof, made sure I had my Mythic Gear dry suit, and I made sure I had proper layering on. I rigged to flip and I dressed to swim. And sponsors, Mythic Gear made me remember sponsors. Mythic Gear is one of our sponsors. They make awesome dry suits for the masses. Anybody can afford them, and they're awesome. I had a couple guys from my Kayak Wars Trout Mafia team get these, and they're really happy with them. Our other sponsors today are Beardhead from beardhead.com. These are stocking hats that have beards that are face masks that are shaped like beards, and look like barbarian beards, curly beards. You can look like a hippie. Really cool, awesome for fishing. And the last one is Aurora Lures. This time of the year, they are selling their Magic Maggies, which are plastic wax worms, and they work awesome. They have red and yellow, and they're really affordable. And they also make crankbaits. So anyway, I got all the safety stuff ready for my kayak, first, and then I'm like, all right, after being skunked, I was not going to accept failure. I was not going to take defeat. So what I did is I have enough room. Literally, I can carry 7 rods on my kayak if I want to, but I took 5. So here was my lineup. I made one, which was a float with an ice jig, just a floating ice jig, in case things got tough and I needed to go smaller for either smaller crappies or bluegills. I had one had like a steelhead float on it that slides up and down on the line with a single hook on it for either minnows or crawlers. I also had one that had what's called a crappie thunder on it. It's a Roadrunner head, has a little plastic grub body. Awesome for crappies on one, and that was what I would switch out on and off with different lures. That would be my lure throwing rod. And then I had one that had a slip sinker. That's a slip float with a double crappie tube. So I have one tube tied on the bottom, about a foot up. I had another tube, tied with a polymer net. This way, I always had 2 baits in the water at the same time. And I did the same with my larger minnow rod. This one I put on a little heavier rod, only because the rig is kind of big. But if you haven't seen them, I don't know the technical term for them, but they're these tandem crappie rigs, and they're made with. They have these two metal brackets that come off, so you can fish two baits at one time, and they come pre-rigged except for the hooks. So what I did, and usually guys are putting a weight on the bottom, and they're bouncing off the bottom, or what I mean, for yellow bass or walleyes or crappies, and I use them under a float. I use a really small drop shot weight. I use a bigger float, and this way I can float two minnows on one rod at the same time without being twisted. Works awesome. The key is to use a little bit heavier line than you normally would on your leaders to your hooks, so it's not as bendy, and to keep them shorter than you normally would, and they won't get tangled. So we got to the lake, and it was cold. It was in the 30s. This first we fished for 2 days in a row. It was in the 30s since when we got there early. We had hand warmers, but I had hand warmers in my in my dry suit. I had hand warmers in my gloves, and that the tip of my fingers are cut on my gloves, so I can still tie, but the hand warmers keep the circulation going. So I don't go to my ice fishing gloves unless I absolutely have to. So there's a slight chop in the water, and just a little bit, which was really nice, which meant our kayaks would drift nice and slow, on the current, and we wouldn't have to anchor much. So the first thing we did is JC was throwing a Roxanne or a Lola, which is one of the Aurora lure crankbaits, and I saw him get a couple fish, and I threw a white crappie thunder with orange head. And basically the way I work that, you can crank it right in, but I cast it out, I let it drop, 1, 2, 3, I lift, crank, let it drop, 1, 2, 3, crank, 1, 2, 3. Basically I'm letting it go up and down as I swim it. And I did great on that. I got, at least 7 or 8 fish on that. Couple what I would call great crappies that were about just on the 12-inch mark, and one nice bass that was 16 3/4 inches. I also got some small ones, but then things as soon as the sun came out, the wind picked up, started slowing down. So then the minnow rod really came into play. Having 2 minnows on one rod, just doubles it. I had fish hit the top minnow and the bottom minnow, and that's when your double rig's working, where they're hitting both, one or the other, or both. I didn't get 2 at a time, which would have been nice, but it did work really good. And it's something you should really try if you want to maximize how many baits you got out there. So what was cool is at one point I'm fishing the double minnow rod on one, and then I got the 2 tubes on the other. So I'm literally with 2 rods, I'm fishing 4 baits at the same time, covering a lot of water, as we're drifting across the lake, and it was really cool. The tubes, my favorite colors, and I don't care what brand of crappie tube you get. They're just like bass tubes, except they're smaller. They sell them in a million different colors. My favorite all time is a red body with white tail. I was also throwing purple with white tail. I've used black with chartreuse, all white. Most of the colors work, but red and white's my go-to, and you can get them anywhere. That doesn't have to be a premium tube whatsoever. And so I was catching them with a few on the tube, and then it slowed down some more. So what I did is I always have crawlers with me whenever I go anywhere, even if I'm going hardcore bass for lures. Learned a long time ago, bring crawlers. It could save your day. So I threw a crawler on the single hook rod out there for a while, and I managed to get 3 or 4 bass, and that was so that day the first day I ended up with at least a dozen fish, and quite missed a few too. So the second day I'm like, if we have the same conditions, because what happened once is when I was tying my other rod, and I had my tube just sitting over the side, I wasn't jigging it or anything, and I caught a fish just hanging off the side of the kayak. So I'm like, well, if they're not scared to hit that, a vertical presentation might be nice if we have another slow drift the next day. Excuse me. So the next day was even colder, but what I did is I brought an ice rod, and I put a small, tiny silver 1/16 ounce cicada on there. A cicada, for you guys don't know, it's called a blade bait. Blade bait's a flat metal bait, which you basically vertical jig, or you can kind of swim it, but you can feel it vibrate as you lift it. Every time you lift, you can feel that thing vibrate. So in this case, the next time I put my minnow rods, out behind me, and as I was drifting, and then I just took the ice rod, just like you normally would through an ice hole, and I just vertically jigged it, 4 feet down, just right under the kayak, and it worked phenomenally. I can never say that word, phenomenal. It worked really good, and I caught probably 2 or 3 dozen fish the second day. None of the real big ones. I got the first day, but I got more numbers, and I caught gills on it. I caught bass on it. I caught crappies on it, and again, the minnow rod. And there's the opening it again. And it worked really good. The minnow rod still worked. I went through 3 or 4 dozen minnows in a couple days. Missed a bunch. And what else can you use? I mean, that's what worked for us on that day. But what else did I have with me if that didn't work? I had crankbaits, anywhere from Aurora Lure crankbaits all the way down to these, the really teeny tiny crankbaits that are like, a little bit bigger than your, the tip of your index finger. I also had JC Crappie caught a bunch of his fish on Lake Fork shad. He loves to use float and fly out there. I don't know if he used it this weekend, but last year he used it really heavily and he did great on it. Tiny Gitsits work great. Mini mites work awesome. Any type of rubber, small plastic rubber shad baits. When I say small, I mean, so take a look at your finger, no bigger than half your finger. You want, a smaller crappie to be able to take these. Crappie thunders come in all shapes and sizes. Roadrunner baits, Roadrunner heads with twister tails work. Just twister tails and a jig. Producto spring grubs work good. We have these great baits. I don't know what they're called. JC's uncle brought some from China, and they're like a mini mite, but longer, a little thicker, and they're a little bit more ribbed. And we put those on tips of ice jigs, and they work fantastic for crappie. Had things gotten slow, I probably would have went down to the ice jig and a waxy on one, and I probably would have went with a jig head and one of those plastic body baits I just described. On the other, if things really got tough, and I would have slowed down, anchored, and just picked apart weed edges all day and tried to get small crappies and gills, but ended up being a really good day. But having an ice rod on a kayak was something different, and it's something, if I'm crappie fishing or walleye fishing or inland trout fishing, I think it's great because it's really easy to use while you're watching one of the rod. You don't have to. You're not constantly reeling and casting. You're not looking where it's drifting. You could put any kind of spoon on there. I had a bunch of spoons. I brought, slender spoons with me, Rapala jigging wraps. I mean, there's numerous other baits that probably would have worked. Just the cicada worked, so I didn't tie anything else on. But Swedish pimples would have worked. Castmaster spoons probably would have worked. Any of those things would have worked awesome. And I had a straight line ice fishing reel, but it didn't really matter, And at one point, I actually broke off my cicada on the front of my yak, so I had one more cicada, and I tied it just on my ultralight, and I did the same thing. It was a little bit more awkward because the pole is longer, but the ice rod was really comfortable because when you're sitting at the yak, it's literally right at your side, and you're just drifting in, you're doing everything else with your other hand, and it was great. So, that's how I approach kayak fishing for crappies in the late fall. Again, this is Pond Boy. I love that you guys are listening to me. I've gotten some great feedback. If you want to find more of my stuff online, I am on every social media known to man. You can look up the keywords Pond Boy and fishing, and you'll find just about everything you need. So this is Pond Boy. Everybody, have a great night, and thanks so much for listening. And I'm sorry for the hiccups in the broadcasting. Have a great Thanksgiving, and it's not too cold yet to get on the water, so get your wimpy butts out there. All right, take care. Good luck, and tight lines.